Hello, my name is Lee Presser. This is my show. I speak frequently to very interesting people. Some of these conversations are so exciting, so intellectually stimulating, I thought others might like to listen in. This is the reason we started recording Conversation with Lee Presser.
Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser. Jane Dueker is an attorney with Spencer Fane, specializing in governmental solutions and media law. If you live in the St. Louis area, you may recognize her name as a political analyst and fill-in host on KMOX Radio. She also provides commentary on news, politics, and law for other Missouri news outlets. From April of 2003 until December of 2004, Ms. Dueker served as Chief of Staff to Missouri Governor Bob Holden, where she supervised management of Missouri's $18.9 billion budget and oversaw the governor's policies and relations with various other organizations. As part of Spencer Fane's Governmental Affairs Practice Group, she provides day-to-day advice to clients before various governmental agencies, to litigants, administrative issues before state and federal courts, and she provides assistance with legislative initiatives. She has been recognized as one of the best lawyers in America and has received numerous industry accolades for her professional accomplishments, including a Women's Justice Award from the St. Louis Daily Record, a Top 10 Lawyers of the Year Award from the Missouri Lawyers Weekly, and St. Louis Business Journal's 40 Under 40. Jane Dueker, welcome to Conversation.
I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, that's quite a resume that you have for yourself. And
Sounded better when you said it.
I was going to say, and you're so young, too.
Oh, you can keep saying that. So now I don't hear anything else now that you've said that.
But you know, you've accomplished quite a bit, and you must have been fairly young when you wound up being Chief of Staff to the Governor of the state of Missouri.
Well, it's interesting because when Governor Bob appointed me, I was Chief Legal Counsel and then Chief of Staff.
So you were with the Attorney General's office first.
Yes, and then I took a tour into private practice.
Right.
And so I was in private practice, and Governor Bob appointed me as the first female general counsel for a governor in the state's history. And I was 7 months pregnant. So I had a 4-year-old at home, and I was 7 months pregnant, and he said, "Can you come work for me?" And I said, do you sort of see what this looks like? And he was spectacular. And so, so I was a young mom, and was balancing everything, and he was incredible. One of the few employers that not only walks the walk, or talks the talk, but walks the walk. So, so it was interesting times. So I was a young mom, and I was a new, government employee and newly Chief of Staff, and so it was an interesting time. I wouldn't trade it. If you had told me beforehand how hard it was going to be, I may not have done it. So it was good that I didn't know. But I guess I was sort of young, but politics is a young man's game. So I was probably even on the older end of the spectrum for politics, but young for probably being CEO of a state.
Well, I was going to say the Chief of Staff is supposed to be like the whip hand of the Chief Executive, whether it's the President or a governor of a state. And so I'm just wondering how you were perceived as the whip hand of the governor.
Well, it was interesting. I mean, there's good cop and there's bad cop, and you have to be sort of the last bastion before the governor. And I quite enjoyed that role. So it was interesting. I think at first I was sort of an outsider, and but it didn't take long to get inside, and I had a lot of help. I had a phenomenal staff, and had strategic people in the legislature, and it didn't take long for me to sort of get that hand. I mean, Bob is an incredible man, principled, wonderful. Everybody really likes him, and so it's good to have a lawyer and to have your Chief of Staff sort of be the bad cop, which I did, and wouldn't have traded 1 minute of it.
And you said your relations with the legislature was good?
Yes, believe it or not.
But at that time, hadn't it just gone from Democrat? It'd been Democrat for like 40 years, and then all of a sudden it turned Republican.
Yes.
And then you come in.
Oh, it was very interesting times. Catherine Hanaway, who was the first female speaker, had just come in and taken over the House. And so it was extremely interesting times. And however much we fought, and Peter Kinder was president of the Senate, no matter how much we fought, we still got a lot done. Everybody heard about the fights because it was coming into an election year, and we had a primary at the time. And So you heard a lot about that, very high profile arguments, but we also got a lot of things done, everything from foster care to fixing the unemployment insurance pool to mental health parity to fixing the prescription drug donut hole. And so there were a wide variety of issues that we were able to come together on, but you heard about, the fights over the budget because we had a historic sort of budget crisis and the cuts to the budget.
Remind people what this historic crisis was?
Well, we had 9/11 and then the economy crashed. And so, Bob Holden took over and the first thing he had to do was cut $400 million from the budget. And that was before
tax revenues weren't pouring in.
They plummeted. And so, that was basically unseen. But as sort of the crisis went on for the next year and a half, 2 years, the cuts got harder and the cuts got deeper. And so, it was the first time in Missouri history that people had to see cuts. And so there was a lot of arguments over the priorities in the budget. And, we can say that not a kid got cut off of health care while we were there. No, public school funds got cut, K through 12, but that's hard. And, given how lean and mean the budget had to become, it was difficult times and nobody wants to be the guy that has to cut. And the legislature did everything in their power to make sure that the governor, if you over appropriate and you appropriate too much money and you don't have enough money to pay the bills, it's left to the chief executive to cut it. Mm-hmm. And so that's the first time that dynamic really had ever occurred. And so then the legislature finally figured out for this governor that, oh my goodness, if you over appropriate too much, then the governor gets to change the priorities of the legislature because he gets to decide what gets cut in the form of withholdings. So the dynamic has changed a little bit in the last decade. But it was all new times. And so, it was interesting dealing with a legislature that was hostile in an election year. So.
I found it interesting when I read that number, 18.9 billion was your budget that you were dealing with. And today it's, I think, slightly over 26 billion.
Well, and the 18.9 billion included money, is really just the money that the chief executive had authority over. We were nearer to 23 because of federal funds. But those are completely earmarked and, no one has control over those funds. So that's the difference. And a lot of people don't understand when you're looking at a $26 billion budget, you really have to look at how much of that is earmarked federal funds that the state has no discretion over.
Do you have any idea what that is now?
I want to say it's probably close to 8 to 10 billion. I'd have to look closely, but that's mainly like road money, Medicaid money. And the interesting thing about Medicaid, which that debate rages on, is that we put in a very small amount and we draw down a lot of federal dollars that gives health care to our citizens. And so Missouri is the most leveraged state in the country.
What do you mean by that?
That means that we put the smallest amount of our general revenue in to draw the largest amount of federal dollars. And the reason that happens is because healthcare industry in Missouri has determined that it's worthwhile to tax themselves in order to generate enough revenue to draw down more federal dollars. And it's called the FRA tax. Mm-hmm. And it's basically the hospital provider tax. And they realize the benefit of drawing down those Medicaid dollars. And so they're willing to tax themselves to allow that to happen so that Missouri can put such a small amount of general revenue into the health care of our citizens. And so that's why Medicaid expansion is just fiscally responsible, because we are putting less and less in to get more and more out. And we get stronger and better health care for Missourians, which allow us to compete in this economy.
Well, that's one of the arguments, but the other argument from the legislator's point of view, from the legislature's point of view, is that once you have that situation, the way you have described it, then all of a sudden the federal government starts pulling the plug. And as you said, it's very, very hard to cut, which means therefore the state has to start putting more and more of its resources in to fill in the hole that was caused when the federal dollars didn't show up. Is that correct? Or is that wrong?
No, that is what they argue, but I think the Obama administration actually helped out the states when they said, look, if you expand and you find that your budget cannot afford the 10%, the 15%, whatever the federal requirement is, then you are allowed to pull the plug. Initially, you couldn't. But now the states can. So if we find out that our budget cannot support that, then the state can pull the plug. I mean, budget decisions are hard, and they're hard every year. And so the idea that we're going to restrict access to federal funds that our citizens put into the kitty when they pay their federal taxes, because that money is going to go to another state. It's going to go to Kansas and Illinois and all of our bordering states. The idea that we would cut off health care now in anticipation of a possible budget issue down the road, I think is irresponsible, because our citizens need it now, and we need the economic influx, we need the jobs, we need the health care, and we need to compete. So, I mean, but it's a legitimate debate to have. And so, but we haven't been having that debate in Missouri because it's just anti-Obama. It doesn't have to do with whether this is fiscally responsible or not. And, that it makes me sad to hear that, because the money's the money.
I find that the political class really doesn't have the vision to be able to even have that discussion. They don't even fully understand the needs of the people. Honestly, I get the strongest feeling that there's a lot of arguments on both sides, Democrat and Republican, for the sake of argument.
Right. And is the fight what they're supposed to be doing as opposed to the accomplishing? And that's very challenging. I mean, and I sort of saw that turning when I was there.
But at the same time, you're talking, and I understand what you're talking about, health care, education, aid to dependent children. I guess it's called TANF in Missouri.
Temporary assistance.
And there's, a long list of these help to individual citizens. But at the same time, we've now put in so much help to individual citizens. Interstate 70, there's no money to rebuild it. 44 needs to be better maintained. We have a huge
we're in a
number of
mode on transportation.
Right, exactly.
Only, and it's dangerous.
Exactly. And the legislature hasn't the guts to put forward even a bill saying, like, we need to raise enough revenue in order to keep bridges from falling down and to keep trucks bringing food into the city of St. Louis from its base in Kansas City.
No politician wants to issue the bad news. And he who issues the bad news, and is honest with the voters, often pay for it.
Well, they wind up on the editorial page of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch and the Kansas City Star, as, and their pictures are right there, and they find the worst possible looking picture. I believe you understand that situation.
Absolutely.
Didn't you recently have some event in your life that kind of put you in a bad light with your friends in the media?
Well,
why don't you explain that?
You mean my Democratic friends when I just recently did the minimum wage?
Yes, explain that whole thing.
The media was fine, actually. It was actually my Democratic friends. So, the city of St. Louis attempted to raise the minimum wage locally, as opposed to, it's always been done statewide in Missouri. And in 2006, 77% of Missourians approved a nice minimum wage increase. So Missouri's at $7.65, the federal is at $7.25 based on that bill. Well, there's sort of this new trend, and it's a national campaign to try to raise the minimum wage locally. Well, in Missouri, that's not allowed. It's just illegal. It's just plain illegal. And the law's been really clear. The city tried to do it in 2001. The courts told them they couldn't. Same mayor, same result. But the city of St. Louis wanted to do it again. They did do it again, and they passed a minimum wage increase locally. And all along, we're told, this is illegal. You can't do this. This isn't the right way to do this. And let's all focus on a statewide effort. And there are initiative petitions pending. And sure enough, the Board of Aldermen passed it. And then I represented a group of people, and we sued to have it.
With your attorney hat?
Yes, with my attorney hat. And it was declared invalid recently. And, I got a lot of backlash from my Democratic friends for opposing a minimum wage, which I don't oppose. I just oppose doing it in a wrong way. And being principled is great, but if you can't get it done, does that really help the cause? And so, here we are again, fighting over this, same way, when we should all be focusing on a statewide effort. You can't just raise it in St. Louis City, and especially for those.
Well, there's a perfect example. Let's just imagine the road called Delmar, and there is the Loop.
Absolutely.
And on one side of Skinker is St. Louis City.
Right.
And on the other side of Skinker is University City.
Right. So then you cross the street and you don't have to pay
the
minimum wage. So
you've got wages that are being paid
Absolutely.
On the east side of Skinker at one rate, and on the west side of Skinker at a different rate. And what do you think the menu items are going to cost?
Absolutely. And
now,
you
people
cannot,
just don't seem to understand that raising the minimum wage is going to have an impact on how much they're going to have to pay for these goods and services.
And sometimes it's sort of a famous thing that Governor Bob told me. Sometimes it's not what you do, it's how you do it. And, implementing a reasonable minimum wage, Missourians were very, susceptible to that. They're receptive to a minimum wage increase. And I think almost everyone agrees it needs to go up. Mm-hmm. But doing it in a way that puts, your neighbor across the street at a competitive disadvantage or an advantage is not the way to get it done. And, we have a lot of small businesses, and small businesses are, sort of the backbone. Everybody says it. Everybody gives the rhetoric that small businesses are the backbone, but something like that adversely affects small businesses much better than larger businesses.
Yes.
And so, it's this kind of discussion that, I don't think politicians feel like they have the ability to give the bad news. But part of leadership is not only doing what your constituents want, but telling your constituents the truth about what they can legitimately have. Roads cost money. Mm-hmm. And when I was in the governor's office, we were looking to seek to get transportation money. It failed then. When your politicians and your government officials tell you that you can have things without without paying for them,
they're lying.
You should.
There is no free lunch.
They're lying. You should know they're lying. But unfortunately, most people think, when I get welfare or I get health care from the government, I'm entitled because I put my money in. When somebody else does, it's fraud, waste, and abuse. And so it's difficult. I think it's hard for leaders to say, look, this is not an easy conversation to have, but we've built all of these roads in Missouri, and now we don't even have enough money to maintain them, much less look toward the transportation future to ready us for the 21st century economy. We're not looking at mass transit and things that could actually move us forward. We're trying to stay above water and maintain the roads that we've built all over the state.
Well, see, that was my point earlier when I said that we are taking huge portions of the budget and directing them to individuals.
Right.
I'm asking the question, is that the right way to go, or should the budget money, the tax money that is collected by the state of Missouri, be going to the greater good?
Right.
And I guess that's really, isn't that the divide between the Democrat and the Republican Party as to whether or not individuals should be handed tax money, or whether these larger projects, which affect all of society, should be funded?
Maybe. I mean, it is interesting because I don't think it goes straight on party lines. What I've seen, and I think time will tell, it's almost a cultural shift as opposed to a political one, where now we're more into the individual. Frankly, we're just more selfish. I don't know how else to say it more simply, but the idea that, we're seeing a generation now of millennials that think they get everything now. Everything, the news cycle is a minute long. They expect everything now. Technology gets them everything now. So the idea that you can think of the common good in a broader long-term sense, that building roads now helps the economy later, is a very difficult conversation to have. You have term limits. You have quicker news cycles. Everything happens quicker. Getting people to think in those long-term sort of group ways, common good, is nearly impossible. And so I see it more of a cultural shift, because I think both liberals and conservatives are both suffering from that. And I also think that we have sort of the 15% fringe on the right, the 15% fringe on the left, which makes up 30, are the loudest and driving more than the sort of silent 70% majority. And so when you don't do the extreme things, it's those 15% that say we're going to primary you and we're going to drive the policy. I mean, we're seeing that on a federal level with the speaker problem.
Well, you see this in the state of Missouri. I mean,
Absolutely.
Coming back to our roads issue, where in 2015 during the legislature hesitantly put forward a 2-cent increase in the gas tax, which, according to MoDOT, what they actually need is somewhere around 15 cents.
Oh, I mean, it's
or
right.
15 to 25 cents, and that would cover all their issues,
Right.
and then they'd be funded. Now, on any given day, you might see prices at the pump near your gas station go from, say, like it did the other day when it went from
You can
like
get a 10-cent spike pretty easily.
It went from like 177 up to 209.
Right.
Now, did we see the world end? Did we see the Post-Dispatch with headlines? Did we see Channel 2, 4, or 5 talking about? No. But if that same amount of money were to be added on because we're going to do something smart, like increase the gas tax so that now we can fix roads, suddenly all of these media outlets that I just mentioned are going to come with their knives and try to puncture somebody and make the world know, oh, look, the price went up.
Right.
Whereas,
and why is that? When we don't know whether that's an international problem or a tax problem and it was interesting in that debate because you had the left saying this is regressive, which there was it was not a perfect tax. I mean, I begrudgingly supported it because I'm like, we've been trying to get money for roads for 15 years. I mean, this is dire.
Are you talking about the 2 cents? Or are you talking about the bill?
The one that went to the voters.
Right.
And it, so the
and
left
that would have also funded for years to come the
absolutely.
entirety of the necessity of maintaining and building new roads.
And so you had the left saying regressive, this isn't fair. You had the right saying we don't need taxes, fraud, waste, and abuse. So there you go. And so the right and the left came together saying, and killed it.
Right.
And so now here we are again.
And I tried to argue with them. I said, because I was at a debate and I was one of the ones debating for this thing. And I said, okay, fine. It took 6 years to get to this moment. Right. 6 years to get to this moment where there's something to vote on. You vote this down.
See you in 6 years.
When do you think you're going to come back with something else? Oh, well, we'll
Not in an election year.
Right, and
so
it doesn't
kiss it
happen.
Goodbye. Yeah.
And so what's happening is that people who know nothing about the political process, these fringe people you're talking about, are having a far greater impact on the majority's lives.
Absolutely. And I agree with that. And so that to me is sort of this cultural shift where the individuals are swallowing the majority as opposed to the other way around. And it's an interesting dynamic. And they don't feel like they have to build a coalition. We get to ramrod what we want through. I mean, you're seeing it with sort of the fringe in Congress and the fight for the speaker. And they don't have enough votes to actually effectuate policy. So they do everything they can to make sure nothing happens. And they're effectively being able to do that because certain political people are actually worried about their influence from an electoral standpoint, and so they get a lot more influence. Now, I don't begrudge the groups because, that's sort of how, that's democracy.
They want what they want.
That's exactly right, but it's incumbent on the 70% to say, wait a minute, there's more of us. We need to become involved. We need to become informed and realize that talking points, it's more than that, and that we have to be informed.
I just don't hear Congress. First of all, I don't understand why I'm not seeing any national candidates for president even talking about the fact that eggs went to $6.69 for 18 eggs. Right. I don't hear them talking about the cost of bread that's now exploding. Ground beef, to get a little thing of $5-6 for a little teeny package of ground beef that used to be 79 cents a pound. Nobody's talking about the basics that affect the individual who has to live. And more than half of the people in this state probably are living closer to $30,000-$40,000 a year than are living at the level
and that is a regressive tax.
Where that's not, where the cost of ground beef, the cost of eggs actually has an impact on them.
Daily.
Whereas people like us, we don't want to pay that price, but it's not going to take food right out of our mouth. Right. The fact that, I can't afford to buy eggs. And yet I don't see the political class talking about any of this.
Again, bad news.
They seem to be, oblivious to this entire idea. And by the way, there is no inflation.
Right. And it's very amazing to me that we're talking about Planned Parenthood. Immigration is incredibly important and those big federal issues. But like you say, when the day-to-day issues of Americans are not even on the table, but there's no incentive, because I can tell you, if that were necessary to get elected, they would be talking about it. And it is very interesting where, you talk about there's a candidate, and there are certain people who are incredible candidates. Then there are certain people that are incredible leaders.
Yes.
And trying to find a person that is both is increasingly hard.
Right. The kind who's capable of backslapping, which is what's needed
Getting
to be elected.
Right.
And then the kind to actually, once you have been given granted the power to do things, to know what to do with the power.
Absolutely.
Without
And to do
having
it-
some staffer tell you, well, this is what we're going to do, instead of you telling the staffer, figure this out. This is what I
Or-
want to accomplish.
At least from what I've seen, and I swear that I still work for the last principled leader, because he always did things that were right for the people as opposed to himself politically. But we'll look at the staffer and say, I understand what the polls say, but I'm going to change the polls. I'm going to go John F. Kennedy, and I'm going to say we're going to put a man on the moon no matter what, and I'm going to change the polls as opposed to the polls changing me.
Right.
And it's challenging. And so, we have a governor who's in a second term. This should be the time. I mean, do it all. Spend all the capital, And,
You're not going to be vice
we have
president after all.
Or else we have a president
Right.
who's in his last term, and he is starting to do some of those things. But that takes courage, and it takes saying, I don't care about the polls, and I want to change the polls. So,
But I want
it's
them to
interesting.
do it the right. You mentioned the president doing stuff. The last part, we got like 3 minutes left.
Great.
The last thing I want is maybe your opinion as an attorney of the Constitution is the basis of all of our law.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay. And nowhere in the Constitution are executive orders mentioned. Nowhere in
Correct.
there. And yet now the public has come to assume that somehow a president has the right to issue an order which is the same as legislation and a law.
Right.
And all of a sudden everybody's supposed to follow. This seems to be this president's modus operandi instead of getting the Congress
It's
lined
a
up.
lot of people's modus operandi.
Okay,
Let's
now,
not-
we'll
let's
discuss
not-
that.
Well, it's interesting because, yes, we have that. When you have a legislature that
It's
doesn't want to
autocracy,
do...
by the way.
Absolutely.
It's not
And it's happening
Republican
on
form of government.
Right, and it's happening at a local level. I mean, nullifying is like the new thing. It's the new hip thing where if you don't like what the federal government's doing on gun laws, you're going to try to pass a law in Missouri that says we're going to nullify gun laws. You don't like what the legislature's doing in Jeff City on minimum wage, so you're going to try to pass a local ordinance.
Yes.
Nullifying seems to be the new thing, and it's in vogue to say, nah, I don't care about the law because I'm going to make political points, whether it's worth the paper it's written on. And again, to me, that I don't believe in that. I think we all believe in the Constitution. We believe in the letter of the law. But now amnesty, nullifying, that all seems to be when we need it the most. Seems to be when people are abandoning it. And I think it's leadership void. I think people are afraid to lead. And I don't know, the voters need to demand it. Mm-hmm. And the voters are responsible for this. But I think it's going on everywhere. And I think if elected officials don't have to follow the law, I don't know why the citizenry think they need to.
Pause 1 second, because I want to talk right. Put me on the camera. Come here. There you go. I want to say right there to you, this is you. You voters out there, you're the ones that caused this by not electing the kind of people who actually know what they're doing. And if you want the situation in the United States to continue the way it is, keep voting for the people that you've been voting for. You want to find some people who actually know what they're doing and have you in mind, then perhaps things might change. Back to you.
Well, and I think that it's incumbent on people to say, you have to look beyond the talking points. You got to make an effort to become informed. And it is your responsibility.
We've run out.
Great.
This
well, it was
has been
interesting.
fun. Thank you very much. We're going to have you back sometime soon.
I would love to.
And I've been speaking with Jane Dueker. She's an attorney, and she's also a whole lot of other things, which we won't go into right now. We're going to upload this to YouTube so that if you missed any part of this, you can go to YouTube and show it to your friends. And for the rest of you, well, of course, we'll see you next time. Thank you very much for being with us, and tell your friends to come and look at it. Bye-bye.